And there's the count.
Welcome to Break Everything. Your host, Lisa L. Levy, will guide you through critical thought conversations and a journey of directed disruption that makes a difference. Experience bold conversations with industry leaders who are willing to challenge the status quo.
Hello and welcome to today's conversation. I am very excited and honored with our guest today, Michael Hund, who is the CEO of the EB Research Partnership. Today, we're going to be talking about innovation in fundraising for healthcare research. Michael joined EBRP as the CEO in 2017. He previously served as the Director of Development for the Multiple Myeloma Research Foundation, leading their successful $100 million Curing Cancer Now campaign. Previously, Michael spent over a decade in leadership at the actor and philanthropist Paul Newman's Hole in the Wall Gang Fund, working on behalf of children and their families battling cancer and other life-threatening diseases and illnesses. Michael received his MBA from Yale, the core credential from the Harvard Business School, and has an undergraduate degree in philosophy from the University of Kansas. We're going to talk a little bit about that today. Michael has spent his career dedicated to transforming healthcare. He sits on numerous boards for nonprofits. He lives in Connecticut with his wife, Sarah, and their 4 daughters. Michael, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Lisa, thank you for having me. The honor is all mine. And just want to thank you for being a leader, an innovator, and a disruptor in the space and shedding light on people like yourself. So thank you.
Absolutely. My pleasure to have you here. So I did the formal intro, Michael, but it's really so much more impactful if you tell us a little bit about your story and your background and how you ended up doing what you're doing today.
Oh, that's great. Well, look, I've been really lucky in my life and my career. I grew up in a town of 200 people in the Flint Hills of Kansas. We had more cows than people. And, it was a great way to grow up, having a sense of community and helping your neighbor and, the art of possibility. What brought me to the East Coast, and you mentioned this, was the actor, philanthropist, race car driver, Paul Newman. And, he had a camp for kids with serious illness, things like cancer, sickle cell, HIV, AIDS. And his whole premise was, kids that battle disease, in many ways, they're robbed of the chance to really just be a kid and have a normal childhood. So let's create a camp for them that's in a medically safe environment where they can ride horses, where they can fish and camp out, but most importantly, meet kids that are going through what they're going through and really have that feeling that there's a community, that you're not in this alone. So, my grandfather had always told me about Paul Newman, and if you want to know the secret to life, look at what this guy's doing. He's taken his platform and his fame and he's given it back to others. So I learned you could volunteer when you were 18, and I got in a pickup truck and drove across the country, worked with a group of young people from inner cities in the Northeast, battling HIV and AIDS, and it changed my life. I thought about going to law school and other pursuits, but from that first week of volunteerism, I said, look, this is how I want to dedicate my career. And ever since then, really focused on, helping those that battle pediatric disease.
That's absolutely fantastic. And the work that you've done has always been very much related with children. Everything that you're doing, what's the best part about the work you do? Where do you get your greatest sense of fulfillment?
Yeah, well, I think, going back to that first experience as an 18-year-old, I can only speak to myself, but I think for the most part, my world revolved around me when I was 18, right? So going and working with people, that from the moment they were born were just, it was the hand that they were dealt, battling disease. They didn't choose that. They didn't make lifestyle choices to have that fate. So I think at that point, it really clicked, number one, how lucky and blessed you are if you don't have to battle disease, right? And it gave me a sense of, starting to learn about selflessness. Like, there's things in the world that are much bigger than you. And if you have a skill set where you can help, that's kind of our duty on this limited time on planet Earth, right? To use our skills and our talents to help other people where we can. So that was, really a life-changing moment. I think the rewarding part started with what's actually not rewarding. The great thing about working with kids with pediatric disease is you learn so much about strength and courage and bravery, like the things these kids go through by the time they're 6. are things that most adults never go through in their entire life, but most carry it with courage and resiliency and positivity. So you learn a lot, from these young people, right, that tend to be really wise and mature, but the changing, trajectory in my career was the unfortunate side is when you deal and you work in pediatric disease is not everybody makes it, right? And it was the unfortunate part of experience in not only the loss of life in young people, but seeing the impact that had on families that really changed what I wanted to do, which is, looking at the root cause of what causes disease. The camp was an amazing resource in community building, but that's what really made me say, look, I want to go into medical research because I'd like to, I think about the world and problem solving. What's the core problem? It's the disease itself. How can I spend my time here to really learn about medical research and leverage skills to be able to help those that battle disease? So that was a turning point to say, okay, what can I do about this? How can I be part of the solution? So that drove me into going into the field of medical research. And then, I think many people have big hearts and great ambitions for nonprofits. I come from the school of philosophy that is, nonprofits, 501c3 is a tax status, right? That's not a business model. And I believe the ones that can really succeed, run a nonprofit, 501c3, medical research, charity, the same way you'd run a Fortune 500 company, right? Because if we aspire to have great products and great automobiles and, these other great, for-profit businesses and products we use every day in our life, and we want the best teams and the best plans to do it, arguably things like treating and curing disease should have a much greater weight in society, right? So those things deserve good business leaders and good business people. So, bringing that all kind of together, what I love about what I do is, even after a long day, and, as there's plenty of them, go to bed at night feeling blessed and, really a lot of gratitude that I can spend my time for work that really helps people, particularly kids battling disease and the families that are part of their networks. And then, the other really rewarding part is to be able to take business skills and business principles, things like principal investing and venture capital and, biotech models and entrepreneurship, and apply those really important, principles to things that they're not always traditionally applied to, which is curing disease. How can we take a really good business model and take curing a disease from 30 years and accelerate that timeline into 10, right? So that, I think, for me, is rewarding.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's start to get specific. So let's talk about EB, what it is, and with the research partnership, how you are running a not-for-profit differently and being, my favorite word, right? Being disruptive, maybe a little softer, nicer way of saying it, being innovative. But let's take what is the disease that you're dealing with? How are you going after it? And how is this model of yours so transformative that it's making an impact in a way that so many other not-for-profit research groups just don't make the progress you're making?
Yeah, I kind of break it down into three things, starting with what EB is. The full name is Epidermolysis Bullosa. As I'm sure you can imagine, we call it EB for short. It's a rare disease. It's one of 7,000 rare diseases that impact 400 million people. We forget that sometimes. Rare diseases in individuality are small, but as an aggregate, that's 10% of the global population, right? And if you look at that cohort, 350, 400 million people on the planet, 95% have zero approved treatments, right? And EB is one of those. So the disease itself, it's a rare genetic skin disease. Kids with EB are called butterfly children because their skin is as fragile as the wings of a butterfly. So, what does that mean? It means that it's incredibly painful. Life expectancy is 1 to 30 years old. Life consists of full body bandaging, constant doctor's appointments and visits, pain, things that we take for granted, having a glass of water, eating a meal, getting up to walk, can be painful and excruciating. So that's the tough part about EB. The good news is EB is one of these rare diseases that's caused by one genetic mutation. Certain diseases, cancers can be thousands of mutations. It's complex. EB is caused by one that we know and we have in our targets, right? So our mission, and the research and medical community shares this mission with us, is we believe we can cure this disease by 2030. So challenging disease, but great opportunity to solve it. As a foundation, when we started, there was 2 clinical trials, little hope. Just 10 short years later, we have 35 clinical trials, the majority of which we've actually funded under venture capital models. For the first time ever, we have 4 phase 3 clinical trials, the last phase before approval. So now is an exciting time. There's hope, but we won't stop until we cure the disease, and we want to do that by the end of the decade. The second thing is really we have an innovative business model, right? So we were founded by a group of parents that just set out to save their children's lives. We were really lucky to have Jill and Eddie Vedder, lead singer of the band Pearl Jam, join us as a founder. Jill's best friend had a child with EB, so they elevated the platform. When you have a global rock star, it helps get the mission and awareness out. Also, some of the founders were Jamie and Alex Silver. Alex was a Harvard MBA. He had a son with EB. He thought about the business in an innovative way. Like, what's the best business model? We shouldn't just write checks and hope for the best. We should build an economic upside. So EBRP's business model, there's case studies being done at Yale University and Harvard and the Milken Institute. And what makes it different? We just believe every penny that we put out the door and we invest in research should have an economic upside where if it's commercially successful, those dollars come back to the foundation so we can fund more research until we cure the disease. And, we didn't invent venture philanthropy, but we've pioneered institutionalizing that as a model, meaning we don't put a penny out the door unless there's some sort of economic upside. And that model is scalable to those 400 million people with a rare disease, and we share that and we teach it. The last thing I would say on that third point is exactly that scale. Not only is the model scalable to help 10% of the global population, and we actively that's our intention to make sure people can learn from this model and benefit from this model. But because we're a monogenetic disease with one genetic mutation, it's observable on the surface of the skin. A lot of the research we fund is some of the most innovative in the world that will change the course of humanity. Things like gene therapies, gene editing, messenger RNA, immune therapies. And we get to be first off the runway, again, because we're a simpler problem being monogenic disease and observable on the surface of the skin as opposed to internal organs. So the science that we fund today, the mission is to cure EB, but in the process, if we can leverage that science to scale to other genetic diseases as kind of the guinea pig, the first off the runway, then that's our intent. So that's a little bit about, I think, what makes us unique and also gives us optimism.
And if I understand correctly, the venture philanthropy approach and what you're doing and how you're doing it, right? You are, in the really layman's terms, right, able to now you're self-funding as much as, so many not-for-profits rely strictly on donation and the charity. You are self-funding and through that reinvestment opportunity into yourself and other research opportunities. It's now not just EB, right? Because that's how it trickles out.
You're exactly right, Lisa. I mean, it's perfectly said. And to give a specific example and a case study of how that works. So a few years ago, we have a scientific advisory board that reviews every research dollar that we spend. We approved a project for a gene therapy academic study at a university on the West Coast. So EBRP funds that study. Rather than just writing the check, we negotiate basically a venture capital deal that allows us to share in the commercial success with a company, with that university. Because for us, our shareholders are patients, right? So if there's economics to be derived from investment, that should come back to a foundation that's funding research to solve the disease for those patients. So, a few years after we funded that research, they were approached by a publicly traded biotech company that acquired that IP from that university. At that time, because of the deal that we negotiated, we returned $3 million to the foundation. So if you think of the first objective, it's to fund the science that has the best chances to significantly improve the quality of life in patients, or now, by medical definition, projects that are definitive and curative. Like that word's being used in EB, which is, exciting. So that's goal number one. We supported science that otherwise wouldn't be advanced. We're the biggest funder in the space to get that to a point where there is commercial interest. So, the economic returns are kind of secondary. We just want to advance great science into the hands of patients from the bench to the bedside. But then that second objective, if there is commercialization, patients as a community and the research community ought to share in that. So because of the deal we negotiated, we returned $3 million. So in the end, what happened? We advanced science that otherwise wouldn't be funded, got it to the hands of a commercial party that can then take it to clinical trials, run clinical trials that can treat patients, and then hopefully eventually have approval. But then we did 6 times our initial investment to fund more research to continue that process, right? So, yes, the majority of our funds still come from individuals and donors and events. But you think about that case study, we took your dollar and we turned it into $6. So, your point that you made, it's an incredibly sustainable model. And the last few years, we've evolved that. We used to just fund academic medical centers under venture philanthropy models. But then we said, sometimes what can actually be faster is supporting companies. Sometimes what can be even faster is starting companies. So we've started, 4 companies with groups of entrepreneurs in the last 2.5 years. We spun some into a holding company of which we're a shareholder that can be invested in by institutional investors. So, really evolving and expanding and revolutionizing that venture philanthropy model into something new and different, all with the goal of how can we put speed into the system of getting treatments in the hands of patients.
And so, pulling away from the philanthropy perspective into the business side of this, right? You have a scalable model. It is repeatable. It is absolutely something that you can apply across all sorts of different avenues of research and develop curative solutions. That's absolutely fantastic. And it's fun to think about and see the big dream of the cures. But what are those barriers to treating and getting to curation?
Yeah, that's a great question. In rare diseases, you think about the populations, right? So EB affects somewhere between 20 and 50,000 people in the US. Any disease that has less than 200,000 patients is a rare disease. Some rare diseases have 2 or 3 patients, right? So there's sort of rare diseases and then these ultra rare diseases and then nano rare diseases that may be just 1 or 2 patients. So, I think if you think of the barriers, the statistics show that, half of these 7,000 rare diseases don't even have a foundation, right? So there's no aggregate community. The strong majority never raise over $1 million, right? So it's the organization, the funding, the aggregating groups of like-minded families that want to make a difference. So it kind of starts there. You need leaders, and we were lucky. Like I mentioned, we had parent founders that were incredibly capable. In the Silver family, we had, celebrities that stepped up, and Jill and Eddie Vedder, that elevated the platform. So we've been lucky in that way, and we take that responsibility as a leader to help others. Other barriers when you run a clinical trial, if you look at something like COVID, right? Those clinical trials were thousands and thousands of people for a phase 1. For a rare disease, a phase 1 clinical trial, maybe 3 to 5 patients, right? So, and that seems like, okay, great. You know exactly where those patients are. Let's sign them up and advance it. Fortunately, that's not the case. Finding patients that are right fit and that they have time in their, very busy schedules just managing their care. So locating patients to participate in research and clinical trials is a big barrier. And then lastly, I mentioned this a little bit, but just funding, the big diseases of the world, the big causes, they have a lot of interest, a lot of connections. It's much more challenging in a rare disease. You're starting with a small group of families and their networks and kind of hoping that expands. So all those things are, barriers. How we've thought about working through some of those solutions is, we talked about venture philanthropy as a sustainable model. So you don't just have to rely on those galas and those campaigns and those major donors. Like that's still the majority of our funding, but there's revenue sources that are outside of that, and thinking about how can you can sustain that over time. We think about, entrepreneurship with technology in the same way we do with investing. So we've started a first of its kind, technology platform with Amazon Web Services and the Stanford University School for the Center for Definitive and Curative Medicine, which is my favorite thing to say. It's not a marketing slogan. It's Stanford's Center for Definitive and Curative Medicine. And the idea there is how can we use technology to map patients to clinical trials that are right for them, to connect patients with families like them. You and I pull up our phones and we can find the best Italian restaurant within 15 miles of it. Patients ought to be able to do the same thing with clinical trials and research centers and doctors and patients like them. So that's how we kind of think about overcoming some of those barriers.
And they're huge barriers, but you're getting momentum, and the momentum is started with the EB, but you are able to build from that, and it's absolutely awe-inspiring. I mean, going for the curative solutions to these rare diseases. With all of this work that you do, how do you focus on hope for the future? What are the things that you can see, right, that are obstacles in the space that you're taking down? But I know you have 8 years to the cure, right? That's your mission. But what does it look like after the cure?
Yeah, that's something I think about that all the time. And, for us, the last 10 years have been pretty unprecedented in rare disease. To go from 2 clinical trials to, almost 20 times that, we've seen that success, but it wouldn't have happened without funding those trials and supporting those trials and kind of creating this market landscape. So, what do we do once we find that, that treatment, that life-saving treatment, when we find that cure? It's our intent that I wish every single one of those 7,000 rare diseases can see the same progress that we had, right? So I won't stop, once we do cure EB, and we always say it's not an if, it's only a when, and that's what we're working to accelerate. What I would like to do, and my intention, is to take everything that we've learned and teach that to other foundations, and we do that now. But I mean, this, you write about this, you think about this, your guests talk about this all the time. We've learned that you sure as heck derive a lot more from your mistakes, right? And doing this for a decade now, we've learned probably more from not doing, knowing the right thing to do at the time and learning from those mistakes, and then learning how to do it right and moving forward. So whatever we can do to save years off of a treatment, years off of a cure, time, business models with other rare disease organizations, that's really our duty. That's our responsibility. The focus is to cure EB, but in the process, pioneer this model that can be used by those 7,000 rare diseases. EB is just, one of the just excruciating, devastating, just really, really tough diseases. So if we can help others along the way, then that's exactly what we ought to do.
Absolutely. And I love that the language you were using, learning from mistakes. We often talk about, failing fast. And I've always had a hard time with that language because nobody sets out to fail. And with my consulting practice, the desire is a spirit of experimentation, right? Where we're going to try something, we're going to see if we get the results we were looking for. And if not, we're going to learn something and we're going to take our next steps.
Yeah.
And so I love that you were referring to mistakes and not failures, because that is, I think, a limiting belief that we put on ourselves. I think it's a very American thing.
Yeah.
But I that you very naturally are talking about leveraging what you've learned because you've made some mistakes, sharing that knowledge so that others can do better faster and not have to relearn the same learning moments that you've experienced.
Yeah. And you said it perfectly, like fast is the key word there, right? Like, we discourage failure, but doing it fast. And, the culture of the organization and the ethos of the organization is the urgency that these families have. Like, these parents want to see their kids make it to another birthday, right? And they're encountering, difficulties and challenges every day, a wound they didn't expect, a bandage that they didn't know they would have to wrap, a doctor's appointment or a surgery or hospitalization they didn't expect. And they got to move forward and figure it out and adapt, right? So I think culturally, that's how we think about it. And as you said perfectly, like, it's that focus on the rebound, right? The getting back up and then learning from it, dusting yourself off and moving along.
Yeah, and that's where the power is. It's not in what didn't go according to plan. It's what you take away from the experience. Michael, with every conversation that I have, I build to the last question, and it's my favorite question because I want to take away all constraints and give you a magic wand. And with the magic wand, I want you to solve for one thing in healthcare. Time isn't a constraint. Money isn't a constraint. What if you were going to swing for the fences? What's the one thing you would do?
Yeah, that's a great last question. I think about my own life, and I have 4 daughters, and my daughters don't have a rare disease, right? And I think about that responsibility to help other families, and it's been 15 years of my life working with, long before I was as a parent, and working with families that have children that are born with these diseases, these excruciating diseases that they never expected, they never knew, they don't realize until the happiest day of your life, having your first child, turns into one of the most scary. And, I can't even imagine as a parent what that's like. We try to, be there for our kids, be there for our family. We try to solve things. We try to protect. And, when you have an illness or a disease or any sort of medical or mental or health challenge, like you can't fix it. Right. And, but you want to do everything you can to somehow solve it, to somehow work towards a solution. So, I guess on a macro level, the magic wand is that every family or every parent that has a child with one of these diseases has resources, and that can mean a lot of things. That could be a foundation that's fighting on their behalf. That can be capital and a biotech community and investment and philanthropists that, care about this disease and want to fund a solution. That can be just a network of families going through the same thing, a doctor or a medical center that understands them. Like, I think, that's been the most challenging points of my own personal professional journey is like, really your heart goes out to parents and families that don't have that because they're just fighting to find a team, around them. And they want to do whatever they can to solve it because day to day, it doesn't seem like there's anything you can do to solve it. So I think just every parent that battles anything, difficult with their kid, just that magic wand of dropping a library of resources into your lap, and of course, magic wand to cure EB by 2030 or before. And of course, a magic wand to take everything that we've learned and help a good majority of those other diseases, and then if I kind of think of a macroeconomic magic wand, I think a personal passion of mine on top of all the other ones discussed is like, and this, you think about it, you and I have talked about this, you write about it, you teach on this, is like healthcare right now doesn't have great products. All the apps that we have on our phone that are designed so beautifully and well to make our lives comfortable and easy, like healthcare ain't there yet, So my other magic wand is like, let's start making some good UX, some good designs, some good products that can help patients navigate their journey with the disease, because Lord knows we have the technology to do it, right? So let's bump, healthcare and patient needs up to the top of that technology, application, good product priority list.
Wow. So there were like 4 magic wands in there, Michael. You are the first person who you go. I absolutely love it. But, breaking them down, one of the things when I started asking the question, I wasn't entirely sure what kind of answers I was going to get, but I figured it would be fun to hear. But there's a theme, right? Then the theme that's presented itself is interesting to me. And it's about access to resources, the right kind of care, the right care at the right time, having the supplies necessary to provide care, information, education. All of these things they exist. It's not like we have to go and invent a product or a service or a way to solve for any of these things. We just have to deliver them in a way that it gets to the people who need them. 2 of your magic wands in there, I'm going to say, you don't need a magic wand. You're already on the path to cure EB by 2030. You don't need a magic wand for that. But I love the theme that's building out of this and the fact that we just need to get what already exists to the right people. And your last magic wand, right? Using technology that already exists in ways. Coming out of the last kind of economic downturn in 2008, 2009, that's when we saw the rise of things like Airbnb, Uber, Lyft, right? The innovation that comes through difficult times and how we leverage technology to make things easier. We need to do that in healthcare. And I love that magic wand. So you are truly the first person who's given me more than one, but they are very impactful. Thank you for that.
Well, thank you, Lisa.
Absolutely. And so that concludes our show for today. Thank you for joining me, Michael. For our viewers, our listeners, thank you for going on this journey with us. And I hope you really understand just how disruptive the venture philanthropy approach can be and what they are actually accomplishing with EB research partners. Have a great rest of your day.
You have just experienced Break Everything with Lisa L. Levy. Critical conversations on directed disruption that make